With the Advantech subfloor assembly, you can be sure that you're building a reputation on something stronger. And the best builders, well, they may always stand apart, but they never stand alone. So ask yourself, are you bringing your A game?
Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome to the UnBuild It Podcast. Steve Basic here, and I am joined with the infamous Jake Bruton.
Hello.
And Peter Yost.
I thought it was handsome Jake. I didn't know it was infamous.
Yeah, I'm
Jake.
choosing my adjectives now. Handsome.
Pretty Jake?
I'm prickly Pete.
Prickly. I don't even want to go there. I'm not saying that.
What are we talking about now, man?
Listen, you are not going to believe what we are talking about today. I could tell you, but you still probably wouldn't believe it, because this is probably one of the most interesting topics in all of building ever, in all of time.
Oh, really?
Whew. Ready for this?
You set the bar high, but
I like surprises.
Wall framing.
He may have oversold that a little.
a little bit.
At least a bit.
We're talking about wall framing.
Okay, man.
Framers are some of my best friends. They're good guys. They're intelligent guys.
You and Tommy?
Me and Tommy. Tommy from Oregon. Tom, this is a big shout out for any of you that don't know Tom. Tom is from Awesome Framers, and I call him Tommy, but Tommy's from Oregon. Tommy from Oregon. Awesome Framers.
Handsome
Shout
Jake. Awesome Tom. Awesome Tommy.
out. Awesome Tommy. So there you have it. Yeah, wall framing. It's a pretty important part because that's what holds the roof up, right? And
At least.
holds the walls up, holds the windows in. It's a pretty important part of the house. And it's one that is pretty interesting because I think it's the one that has the most options available. And roofs probably, I would say, have the most complexity to understand, or at least that's what people make it out to be. But walls definitely have the most options available as to how do I construct the wall.
What do you mean by that?
Well, what's it all about is, I think, what you're really asking,
I knew that was coming. Excellent. You
Thank
planted
you.
the seed, Jake, and it's growing.
Thank you.
right? So what is it all about? Not unlike the floors, and I'm assuming that they're probably going to hear the floor one before this one. So in the floor
So your
one,
Ferdinand Falk reference still works.
yeah, I'm not going there. But when you're dealing with walls, there's a whole bunch of stuff to consider, right? There is obviously the budget is always a consideration, but insulation level, energy level, because Peter's mantra of managing moisture and energy
With equal
intensity. Well, if I make a wall thicker, it's harder to manage the energy because I have less of it moving through that wall because it's more efficient. And then that translates into a number of potential problems if I don't choose to solve for them. So permeability of the wall is always a question. Does it need to dry in both directions? One direction,
water,
draw
vapor
through?
permeability. I thought he meant like permeability, like will it keep the Mongol Horde away? Sorry. I'm with you. I'm catching up.
Mongol Horde. Interrupted me with Mongol Horde. But so there's a whole lot of things not unlike floor framing. Now, one of the interesting things about wall framing is I don't think you have as many choices in material, although now that I'm thinking about it, you have your common solid stick stud, 2x4, 2x6, 2x8.
T-stud.
I've never framed one with a 2x10, but I'm sure somebody out there has framed a 2x10 wall. Then you have T-stud in 2x6, 2x8, and 2x10. You have people putting I-joist off the outside of the wall. I've hung floor trusses on the outside of buildings. And then you have the double stud wall. You have the double stud on a single plate staggered wall.
Mm-hmm.
ICF, SIPs.
And then you have alternative. So I'm just going to lump them and call them alternative systems because we only have 30 minutes and we can't possibly talk about them in a coherent fashion. So
are you saying we're going to skip ICF?
no, I'm saying we're going to skim over alternative systems.
Okay.
And maybe we just do a podcast where we talk about alternative systems for housing in general. So staying with the wall. Now, one of my favorite images that I've ever done is absolutely one of Peter's favorites. I know it is.
Is it the one of you going like this?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Sorry.
So
You're gonna have to go.
And then you've got 2 strikes against you, Jake. He's about to boot you from the
About to come
podcast.
I haven't even started
I'm about
drinking.
to come across this table. No, but it's a wall section that I drew that I call the slider.
I knew which one
And
you were
what
gonna
the slider is it is literally a visual abacus of wall framing, wall assembly potential.
Now that's new. I've never heard you call slider.
I just came out with that.
abacus. Ooh.
It's a visual abacus of wall assembly.
You heard it first on the UnBuild It
Potential.
podcast.
Visual Abacus is a good band name,
man.
by the way.
Visual abacus.
Is a
Good band name. That would be a good band.
oh, I thought you said it was
Visual-
a band name.
Visual
No, it
abacus.
would be a good one.
Well, when we start a band after the podcast.
Pass.
Now the first thing I'm
No,
gonna do
listen,
is go.
No
did-
offense, pass.
I don't know if you know it, but I did karaoke at IBS.
I
brought-
heard about it and was so glad that I missed it.
I'm going to put the video up on the UnBuild It show. It's going to go viral. We're going to get 1 million subscribers. I brought down the
I've
house.
heard you sing.
I brought down the house.
That's
I
what,
did people dancing in the aisles. You can believe it or not, but I did. But anyways, getting back to the slider, my visual abacus.
okay.
But what the slider suggests is that there's many ways to differentiate the wall, that you can simply go from a 2x4 to a 2x6 to a 2x8. You can deal with the 3 levels of or 3 opportunities of insulation location, meaning that you have, say, what I'm calling the inner cavity, the outer cavity, and then the outside of the wall in a continuous fashion. So you have those 3 opportunities to deal with stuff. And the reason I break down the cavity is that I have done a number of wall systems where we frame the wall, we put 2 inches of rigid insulation on the outside, we'll spray 1 or 2 inches of closed cell, and then fill the remaining 2x8 cavity or 2x6 cavity with, some other type of blown insulation or something.
And so your inner and outer cavity is just which side of the cavity you're talking. Like,
Well,
so
the
in that
inner is the
instance-
inside, obviously, and I'm not saying this to be funny. I'm saying it for clarification. The inner cavity is, let's just say, the demising point, whatever I choose that to be, towards the inside.
Okay.
The outer cavity is the demising line to the outside face of stud.
Okay.
And then there's insulation that happens on the outside face of the stud. So the beauty of the slider is that you can tune this abacus to your climate, right? I can put more insulation on the outside. I can put less on the outside, more impermeable in the outer cavity. I can eliminate the outer cavity and just put fluffy stuff in the full cavity if I choose to. So it really depends on where I am and what I want to tune this wall framing to. And then, of course, there's the 16-inch on center, 24-inch on center, and then beyond the 24-inch on center, there is everything advanced framing, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you can go down to single plates, you can header hangers. There's all kinds of
delete headers.
Delete headers, put the headers up into the rim joist. There's all kinds of things to do.
And the dimension of the 2x4, 2x6, 2x8, that's part of the slider.
That is part of the slider too, is that you can increase the cavity size, which then gives you the opportunity to increase the outer cavity insulation or inner cavity insulation.
And Steve, if you use a 2x8 as the outside dimension of the abacus, you really can't go beyond 24 on center.
Because you're sheathing and scything and everything
that's
that
sort of a
attaches becomes the limitation.
limiting factor.
Yeah. So and even drywall on the inside. I mean, you'd be able to start walking through the wall,
Right.
if you did like 32 inches on center or something crazy. Or
Although you
48
could look
inches.
at post frame buildings.
Yeah, but they usually have lateral purlins or something that are picking up that slack there. But I think one of the important things to understand is that you can't just go from a 2x4 to a 2x8 wall, fill it with insulation, and say, oh, I'm better now because I have more insulation. Because, again, going back to your mantra of managing with equal intensity, the minute I move out to that 2x8 wall and I double the amount of insulation, what it means is that the face of my sheathing now has just gotten a lot colder in cold climates. And the colder the climate, the colder the sheathing is going to be. And so we really have to come to some understanding that, it's adults need to be playing with the abacus.
You're glazing over that a little bit. The fact that it's all the way out there and that much colder because it's that much more insulated from the interior temperature. Why does that matter? Why would it matter if it's super cold?
Well, we always talk about water management and managing water. Well, we always have to be cognizant of managing vapor so that when we provide cold surfaces, you give the opportunity for vapor to become liquid water by condensation, and then you have a water issue, a water management problem. So we're trying to eliminate that and keep as many surfaces above the dew point and keep them as warm as we possibly can.
Which is now recognized by I think it's just 2021 code. It may have been the 2018 code where they put exterior insulation into the code. I think for all the way down to climate zone 4, where there's a requirement where it's like roughly 30% of the package has to be exterior.
Yeah. And so I'm going to pose a question to you guys, because this is one that's always been somewhat perplexing to me. When we talk about wall system, and I think I know what your answers are, but when you pose a wall system, there's a lot of people out there that want to believe, well, the wall should be able to dry all the way through. You should be able to dry, we shouldn't be building walls with impermeable materials in there. But from the great one that I learned from, Joe, he would say it doesn't matter as long as it has the ability to dry to the inside or the outside.
Or both.
Or both. But if you're limiting the or both, it's not a bad thing, but as long as it can dry to both the inside and to the outside from whatever the impermeable layer is. And, this is one of those things where certainly money and budget come into play. I won't say alternative materials, but materials that aren't as recognized by framers and such. So, and again, this goes back to that whole builder perspective and regionality that, there's some builders that if we're going to use 4 inches of wood fiberboard here. And it's like, okay, yeah, we did, the Joneses house like that. But if I'm down in Texas and it's a builder for the first time and I try and introduce something, their perspective is a little different. And they might not be as willing to accept that. So, but getting back to that drying into the inside, drying to the outside, in a lot of cases, there's a significant budget that gets attached to drying all the way through and some of these membranes and putting all of this stuff going around the house 3 or 4 times, wrapping it in different layers so that we can achieve that. But while it is a better house, it doesn't necessarily need it, right? And that the house is going to perform as successful if I did a 2x8 wall with R6 on the outside and splashed 2 inches of closed cell in the cavity. That house is going to perform very, very well in my eyes. Some people might not like the use of closed cell foam, but I'm saying from a building science perspective, that wall is going to work. It's kind of like I can build a floor system to be rated for 1,000 pounds over of deflection instead of L over 360. I can do L over 1020 or whatever and make it so the house doesn't move the floor. But do we need it? Right? Because the tile manufacturer says L over 720 for large format tile or whatever. So building above that is somewhat a true value judgment in that, do I want to put the budgetary effort towards that? And so the same with wall systems is that yeah, we can build some of these walls and they can dry all the way through, but do we really need to do that?
Well, I would answer it saying what you've said many, many times, which is go for the maximum you can for bulk water control and air control. And you put in the amount of insulation that you can afford that's above code minimums. Yeah. Because then it's the thing that you can optimize from cost solely alone is the amount of R value. The others they're not flexible like that.
And there's certainly more risk attached to water management and air leakage than there is thermal management.
True. Yeah.
Right. I mean, granted, you got to manage that dew point and the cold surfaces, but that's to me as much a water management problem and vapor management as it is a thermal management problem.
Okay, so let's play the pick your wall assembly game. We're going to start in climate zone.
There's a game.
Peter's like, wait, I've been missing out on a game? What? We've been playing Monopoly at my house that always ends in an argument, and we could have been playing the wall assembly game.
Here we have it, folks. Richard Dawson hosting. Let's pick your wall game.
Let's get ready to wall frame.
So let's start with Climate Zone 4.
Peter Yost, come on down. You're the next contestant on Pick Your Wall.
Don't you love it when he screams and then whispers?
Yeah. I bet our listeners do too.
That's my monster truck show voice.
Okay. So if we're in Climate Zone 4, which is where we're recording right now, are you picking a 2x6 wall with no exterior insulation? Or are you picking a 2x4 wall with R6 on the outside?
I would definitely go with a 2x6 wall, even in Climate Zone 4. I've heard Steve said that he's taking rigid insulation, wrap of the house all the way down, even into mild climates, right? So I don't think there's any reason not to do a 2x6 wall with exterior wrap of total insulation, unless it's simply outside the budget.
Wait, sorry. I was saying 2x6 without any exterior insulation or 2x4 with.
I would take I would do the 2x4 with rigid before I did a 2x6.
Okay. Yes. I misunderstood your question. I would like to see if I can get some points back in the game because I was missing.
Too late. It was one question. It's over. That was a fun game.
Do you want me to explain why?
Yes.
So, only because I've done this a whole bunch of times. I've actually taken dozens of houses, counted studs in from an advanced framing perspective and a traditional framing perspective. So when you deal with the numbers, there's basically 3 parts of thermal resistance to a wall assembly. There is the windows and doors, there is the opaque framing, and then there is the cavity frame or cavity opening. So the cavity opening, that's an easy one. That's how we always address what kind of wall we're building. Oh, I build an R21 wall. Well, yeah, that's...
No, you use R21 insulation.
In the center of cavity. You're not building an R21 wall. Right. You're using R21. So the 2x6 is actually 5.86. It's like 1.25 times 5.5 inches. It comes out, it's a little better than, or right around R6. So windows, if we're doing domestic double glazed windows, we're probably in an R3 range with windows and doors. So when you think about it, you have 21 cavity, 6 on the studs, 3 on windows and doors. But the percentages are such that the cavity probably accounts for somewhere around 60, maybe a little bit more than 60% of the wall assembly. The windows are usually hover somewhere around 18 to 20%. And the wall framing in a traditional frame is going to go to probably about the same, 18, 20%. Mm-hmm. So they're going to hover in there. If I do advanced framing, then I can get that 18 to 20% probably down to about 14 or 15% with modest decision-making, down to maybe 11 or 12% with what I would call extreme advanced framing.
And of course, at that point, the glazing percentage doesn't change. It's just framing and insulation percentage.
Now, the glazing I can change because I can move up to a triple glazed window. So I use a lot of triple glazed windows. And for the very reason that I can now take 1/5 of my wall and double the R value by just making that selection.
Jump from 3 to 8.
Right. And if I do that and I go to the R7, R8 window, and I can take my advanced framing from, say, the 20% down to 14%, then I've hit those two categories pretty hard. And the beauty of, I told the story all the time about Gus Handegord, one of Joe's mentors, and I asked him when we were having lunch, him and I, what's the secret to building walls and stuff, Gus? And he said, put as much rigid insulation on the outside of the wall as you can. You probably never go wrong. And so the beauty of rigid insulation on the outside, and the reason we would choose the 2x4 with rigid over the naked 2x6 is that the rigid insulation helps out the cavity, but it also, if I put an R6 panel over the 2x4, I've effectively more than doubled the R value at the opaque
at that
frame,
12 to 15%.
At that 12 to 15%. Yep. And I've upgraded my cavity. And if I do it to the 2x6, I effectively go from R6 to R12 at the stud framing. I go from R21 to R27 at the cavity. And my windows and doors, if they are the triple glazed, they stay at the R7. So you're not really trying to get good cavity insulation. You're trying to build the whole wall R value, which is all three of those components, proportionally.
And so now we're taking something that started in the 70s being called value engineered framing.
And Peter and I wrote a paper, remember, with NRDC or something? We wrote, that was a long time ago.
That was going to be my Pete's resource at the end of the podcast. So we'll come back to that.
Okay. I didn't say
Spoiler alert.
I didn't say anything.
Do we have spoiler alerts in UnBuild It Podcast? I don't think that's a new thing or something.
No, because if it was, I would have one almost every podcast. I'd make a point.
Yeah. Like in The Sixth Sense, Bruce Willis was dead the whole time.
Spoiler alert.
Come on. If that one's ruined for you now, you weren't going to watch that movie anyway if you've never seen it. So
it was kind of freaky.
First time. The first time.
The second time, it was almost like you knew what was coming.
Second time, I almost knew what was going to happen.
Now I lost.
Is there a sixth sense in framing? That's my question.
Well, but this is about wall framing, and we were talking about wall assemblies and such, but we stripped it down to your standard stud framing and what choices you would make. If you wanted to go, say, beyond that, then you'd look at something like, why don't we do a 2x8 and do a staggered 2x4 wall on the outside and inside? And I talked about my buddy Shane, who's at Patriot Building down in Coronado in California. He does that for acoustic reasons, and staggers the studs so that they don't touch. And he energy efficiency is born of that. So, but doing double stud walls, same thing. We can get walls. I've done walls up to, I don't know, probably like R50, R60-ish. I think we did one at R70, which was Farley size.
That was just showing off, though.
Well, that one wasn't showing off. That one was more, we were highly restrictive and limited. He wanted to build a passive house, but we were only limited to 800 square feet. And so it's kind of a funny story, because when I asked Farley's the builder owner, I said, well, how do they measure the 800 square feet? He goes, I don't know. We'll ask the building inspector. So we went in and we asked the building inspector, how do you measure the 800 square feet? And he says, what do you mean? I said, I don't know. This is your damn rule. How are you going to enforce it? He goes, I don't know. I never really thought about it, I guess. I said, well, can we mutually agree that it's the outside of the foundation? And he said, sure, I'll go for that. So we walked out and I looked at Farley. So we just have to figure out how to build a passive wall and hang it out over the foundation. And we did.
R70.
And we hung about R50 of it outside of the foundation wall.
You were just rubbing it into the building inspector at that point.
Yeah.
Well, I had a somewhat of an understanding of what we were going to do before we went in. I just had to kind of lead him.
You just had to manipulate him into doing what he wanted.
Lead him along to agree to see it our way, basically.
It's like being married.
Well, speaking of being married and wall thickness, you didn't know there's any relationship there, but when we did the exterior spray foam wrap on the house in Brattleboro, and I was putting these 2x2s, 3-inch legs off the side of the house to fill that with insulation, my wife said, that doesn't go all the way to the ground. Isn't that going to look funny that the house is going to come down to a certain level and then jog back into the foundation for the last 3 feet? And I said, you'll never notice it. And she said,
How many times has she brought it up since then?
Right. I sort of had to mock it up to show her before I got permission to do it. And what's interesting is I've had no one ever come up to the house and say, what's that really weird jog of over 8 inches from, where that wall comes down to the split face block?
Yeah, I have those conversations. I mean, there's tons of those conversations to have with clients about, we scrutinize everything because we can, and through design and construction, we're able to compartmentalize things to their singular value, right? Like when people will pick out a paint color for a room, like, oh my God, that's a really bright color. And yeah, it is when nothing else is in the room and all walls are painted it. But the minute your daughter gets in there and puts up her 4 posters and you put the 3 dressers and the bed in there and the mirror on the wall, that color's going to look just fine.
I thought you were going to say that if it's paint, it's pretty easy to change the color. I once had a client when I was doing a lot of tile setting choose this rose-colored tile for her bathroom. And I said, it looks really good right now, but when you don't like rose-colored tiles anymore, maybe a rose-colored paint on the remaining drywall, but pick a more neutral color for the tile. That was my advice. But
So going back to wall framing.
We're in agreement that advanced framing techniques can be a good idea for most situations, right?
I think they can.
Okay.
I have one project we did in Carbondale where we stripped that thing down to the bare minimum.
Yeah.
The photos are somewhat scary when you look at them. Like, how is
But the thing to remember is that it's engineered and approved by code, and code has an order of failure, order of magnitude failure rate. So that was what I was leading to, is my conversation with framers and clients about advanced framing. Look, we're not cheaping out. We're not taking things out of the wall to spend less money. We're choosing to spend our money on more efficient options, being more deliberate framers, guys that are paying better attention, culling through lumber better, knowing what the code is, giving a little bit of extra care where they don't have to go, well, gosh, dang it, I have to have that second top plate. Otherwise, I can't get my wall straight. And I want to be like, if it was that 1 2x6 that was allowing your wall to be straight, then we have a problem with the way that you're trying to do this. But it's also, pardon the pun, it's a push and pull in that instance. Okay, if that second top plate's going to be the thing that makes everybody on the job site shut up and quit complaining, then yeah, sometimes we
and that one changes the dynamic of a bunch of things, because pre-cut studs now, you have to get regular studs and cut them. And so there is a game to be played when you lose that. That second top plate is, I very rarely do single plate, because it's just, it's a hard one.
That's the one battle lost out of many opportunities.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a battle that was won. So the first time we did advanced framing in Columbia, Missouri, was an addition, and it was like a 5,000 or 6,000 square foot addition to a 1,800 square foot house that's in a historic neighborhood that has 7 acres. And we're on the second floor, and I asked the inspector to come by to do a preliminary framing inspection because we had a bunch of questions about some odd stuff we had going on. And he pointed at a gable end wall, and he said, you got to have headers in that wall. You don't have headers. And I said,
for the gable end, he said
and I said, no, we don't.
Whoa.
And he kind of just looked at me, and I'm cordial with this inspector, and I like this inspector a lot, actually. And I said, the code says that's a non-supporting wall. The top of my window head is less than 2 feet to the next horizontal framing member, which is what code requires for it to not have to have a header. And I walked him through everything, and he said, the code says you got to have a header everywhere. And this is like 2013. So this is still coming on in our market. And I said, okay, here's the deal. If you're going to tell me that you're not going to pass this without me having a header, then I'll put a header in there. If you're telling me that the code says I have to have a header, I said, you're fucking wrong. Sorry for the language. You are wrong. And he said, I'm telling you that to be able to pass this, you have to do what the code says, and the code says you have to have a header. And so I was like, okay, fine. And I didn't have the code book in my truck, and he left. And like 30 minutes later, he called and he said, I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. I looked it up. You are correct. It does not need a header. And I said, hold on. And he paused for a second, and I went like that and hit speakerphone on my phone. I said, okay, everybody else can hear you. Say it again. And he was like, have a good day, and just hung up the phone. He wasn't gonna, I was like, I wanted so bad
too far
for my guys to hear the inspector say, I'm sorry, you're right. You don't need a header.
You're pushing that, Jake.
But it was like, I feel like it was an eye-opening experience for that inspector. And like we've had many conversations since then where he knows way more about the framing code and advanced framing and all those things now. And I think it's because it was the way I would have taken it is like I had an embarrassing moment where someone knew more than me and I argued with them and I was the one that was wrong. And I would have taken it upon myself to be like, okay, I have to figure out what I'm missing.
Yeah.
You know? And so everything is it's a trade-off. Stick to your guns with your clients and with your subcontractors and educate them, and they'll make better decisions. There's really no argument for we need more wood in the wall. One of my lead guys for a long time would say, seems to me like you're cheaping out. And I'd say, okay, what proof do you have that it's not safe or that it's not structurally sound anymore? And he said, well, we've been doing it this other one. I'm like, we've been doing it is not a reason.
Yeah.
We've been burning fossil fuels for 100 years. That doesn't make it the right choice. Right. It just means we have been.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Like you'll have drywall cracking and stuff in a house and then come back and the drywall will be like, oh yeah, no problem. The problem here is that it just wasn't fastened enough. And they'll put in another 24 screws. And it's like, okay, let me get this straight. The wood behind is moving like crazy. The drywall is very stable and not wanting to move. And your solution is to attach the very stable product to the moving product. More.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
So Pete's Resource.
We got to come up with a better nickname for that.
Steve.
Petey's Sources.
Petey's Sources.
No, there's no PD.
Maybe our editor can put some like stars around him while he talks. Petey's Sources.
We did do an efficient framing article. I think it was with Ann Edminster and Stephanie Finnegan. Yes. And that is published by the National Resource Defense Council. We also did the same article for the International Code Council Safety Journal.
Yep.
So you can find the article in two places.
Can't believe it.
And I remember the quote that we put at the top of the article under the title. Do you remember the quote?
I don't.
This is how I'm going to close this.
I'm going to figure it out in about 2 seconds.
The quote was, "Wood is good when you use it as you should." And the quote was from an Amish carpenter.
Wow. I don't even know where to go from there.
Wood
except
is
maybe
good
goodbye.
You heard it here first on the UnBuild It podcast. And that's Pete Yost, Handsome Jake. And what's your nickname?
I don't have one.
Groovy Steve?
I'm absent nickname.
That's the wrap up on efficient wall framing.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes so that other people can find out about it. Till next time, thanks for watching.
Bye now.
Have a good one.